Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Asana customer training. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Sanebox to co-present a training on how to develop a communication strategy. So we're going to be talking a little bit about a collaboration trifecta, what that is, and how it can work for your team in distinguishing what types of communication should be handled in which channels. A bit of logistics before we get started. This session will rely on a basic understanding of email as well as Asana. It will be more conceptual and advanced topics that we'll be covering, so you can always go back and refer to this again if you want to get caught up on the technical functionality of either system. A quick overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to first introduce both Sanebox and Asana, and we'll talk about why we're discussing communication strategy and what's important when we're talking about that collaboration trifecta. Then we'll go into each of the different communication channels that we recommend building out, including the external communication in email, building out your internal communication strategy in Asana, and then finally ending with how to manage instant communication and building out a channel for that with your team. And then, as I mentioned, we will leave plenty of time at the end for questions and answers. So with that, I'd love to introduce my esteemed co-speaker for the day, Dimitri. Dimitri is a co-founder of Sanebox, and at Sanebox, he focuses on the growth and business development of the company. Prior to Sanebox, Dimitri co-founded a social media startup, Wanto, and spent 8 years at Overture, which was afterwards acquired by Yahoo, where he led business development efforts in emerging markets. He's now an expert of email, and he works on developing a platform that can help you manage your email better, and I'm delighted to have Dimitri join us today. Thanks for joining us, Dimitri.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and so we'd love to start first, Dimitri, by getting a little bit more background about what Sanebox is and the offering that you have on the platform.
Sure thing. So yeah, we started the company about 6 years ago, and the original purpose behind it is we saw that the volume of emails continues to grow, actually at an accelerated rate, and the signal-to-noise ratio in an average inbox was getting worse and worse, meaning more and more unimportant emails. And so our solution was to analyze how you interact with your inbox to determine what's important to you. And we move all of the unimportant stuff out of your inbox into a separate folder and summarize it in a digest. And then over the last 6 years, we've built probably a dozen or so other features that help you kind of manage your email life. And what the most important thing about that is we work with any email provider, any email client, and any device, because all of our features are basically folders that live anywhere you do your email. So if you use email, we automatically work with you.
Fantastic, and most people who use email definitely need the help. So we're happy to present the solution today. And so we will also, for anybody on the line, be providing more information coming out of this session about the specific Sanebox offerings, as well as a promotional code that you can use. So keep an eye out for that in the follow-up email. But we'd love to dive into our content for the day, talking about building out a collaboration trifecta, and so that's what we're suggesting to use for the communication strategy across your team. And Dimitri, I'd love for you to expand on why this is important and exactly what we're talking about in each of these 3 channels.
Definitely, and actually, if we can kind of take a little bit of a step back, I'm going to show you guys something else. I'm going to steal someone else's presentation here for 1 second. And I don't know, folks, if you're familiar with this idea of flow. And flow is basically kind of I think there's many ways to describe it, but one of them is kind of achieving a seamless state where kind of collaboration and work and progress happens very easily without a lot of struggle. And so there's an idea of personal flow, but then there's in my mind, more interesting idea of a social flow. So how do you get a group of people working together in this kind of seamless, like creative and easy fashion? And so this actually ties in perfectly into what we're talking about here. By the way, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So the first social trigger is concentration, and this is pretty straightforward. So no distractions, focus, and this is actually one of the things that probably the main thing that we designed Sanebox to help with is to allow for this concentration, because the amount of distractions that happens in a normal a normal workday, and distractions really caused by email, are tremendous. And we'll talk about more in more detail later. But getting to the concentration is really important. Shared and clear goals, and this is actually where Asana comes in super handy. So we use Asana internally, and we use it to kind of set the high-level OKRs and translate them into more actionable monthly and weekly goals. So pretty self-explanatory. Now, good communication. I mean, this is kind of the meat of what we're talking about here. Creating a system for communication within a company or within really any group of people is really important. It's very easy to fall into bad habits, and kind of creating that. If you're in charge of your kind of communication strategy at in your organization, or if you have an influence over it, you're in the right place, because this is exactly what we're going to focus on. And specifically, what we're going to the title of this presentation is the communication trifecta. And so what we are going to talk about is really in today's kind of business world, there are three main communication channels. It is instant messaging for really quick, kind of instantaneous feedback loop. Email for longer feedback loop, kind of a little bit more asynchronous. So where instant messaging is synchronous communication, so in real time, email is more asynchronous. And project management is longer kind of actual work time frames. So familiarity, and this is actually where where instant messaging comes in really handy. Is kind of allowing you to develop this, especially for teams that work remotely. Developing kind of a common language and familiarity is really important. And certainly nothing beats being in the same office, or for remote teams, like for instance, at Sanebox we have an annual retreat where we get together for a week and kind of socialize. But then we find that kind of having a informal banter on Slack, which we also use, is really helpful. And then there's equal participation and skill level. This is not so relevant to what we're talking about. Risk, also not super relevant. And sense of control is kind of back to the topic of our conversation. This is where Asana comes in really, really handy for us. We can kind of very easily identify roles and responsibilities and really kind of create that sense of autonomy for everybody on the team, with the projects that they own. Close listening is also pretty straightforward, and this is my favorite. Always say yes. So kind of like in one of the stand-up comedy rules is yes and. So it's important to not say no all the time, but yes and then elaborate. All right. So this was kind of a theoretical detour. Hopefully you guys found it as interesting as we did. But so back to kind of the meat of our presentation. So there is these three buckets that we're looking at is really the first one is email, the second one is project management, and the third is chat. And so really email increasingly is becoming there's been a lot of talk over the years about email going away. And I think actually when Asana started, which actually I remember clearly, its goal was to replace email. And frankly, when Slack started, its goal is also to replace email. And email is not going to go away. Its role is changing, and it seems that the way it's kind of the direction it's heading in is email is the perfect medium for external communication. It's not such a perfect medium for internal communication. And really, the reason for that is it's very difficult when working with customers, when working with kind of external entities, email is kind of the default communication method, and it's very, very unlikely it's going to change. Internal conversations, and especially around kind of projects, it's very important to have to not rely on email, right? And there's a lot of companies, especially larger companies, that overly rely on email. A lot of them are our clients, and it's not it's not great. I mean, there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. We love Asana. There's other project management tools, but kind of developing a protocol around it is really important. And then last but not least, chat. So there's many tools. We internally use Slack, and I think a lot of people are moving towards it. But this is that immediate synchronous communication. It's dangerous because it's very easy to get distracted by instant messages. So it's important to to set the right rules for when instant messaging is important. In fact, it's really important to set the right rules for when each of these communication mediums should be used. All right, so we'll start on the email, and really this is, and I think in a perfect world, this is kind of the external communication tool. What we'll talk about today is a few things. The 3 email commandments. These are kind of the general, theoretical, almost kind of frameworks for thinking about email. Then we'll talk about the email triage process, and some of you may know this as inbox zero process. And then we'll talk about a few email hacks. So we'll go into this in more detail later, but essentially kind of short, actionable tips for being better at email. All right, so let's start with how you can stop being a slave to your inbox. So here on the left is kind of a standard person's inbox. Here on the right is a Sanebox user's inbox, and we'll talk about it in a second. So let's start with commandment number 1. Commandment number 1 is email is like Tetris. No matter how good you are at playing the game, more Tetris blocks will keep coming faster, just like more emails will keep coming faster. So the thing that all of us are, the trap all of us are falling into is, we clear out or we get to inbox 0 at night, and then you wake up in the morning and you're back at inbox 200. So it seems like you can never win the game, and that's true. You will never be able to beat the game at its rules. So you have to change the game. And the way you change the game is by changing your system, by thinking about your process and using the right tools to help you kind of use that system and the process. Commandment number 2. Email should not be your default number 1 priority. So what's happened for a lot of us is email has become kind of this default, unconscious number 1 priority. You wake up in the morning, you look at you open up your phone, and you start going through your email. You get to the office, you open up your laptop, whether it's Gmail or Outlook, whatever you're using, and start typing away. And next thing you know, it's lunchtime, and all you've done is just reply to a bunch of emails. The real problem here is that email is a to-do list that other people write on for you. And actually, any inbox is a to-do list that other people write on for you. So whether it's email, whether it is your Asana inbox, it's the same problem. And so in order to take control of this, we call it the scan, block, ask system. Comes in really handy. So scan your your inbox for important and urgent emails first thing in the morning, and then close your inbox. So scan for them, deal with them. If there's a fire, please put it out. But then make sure to close your inbox. And the reason the way you can kind of do this without freaking out is that you also at the same time need to block off time on your calendar. So I have at 11 o'clock every day, I have an appointment called email time. I have it for half an hour. It can be half an hour, it can be an hour, it can be 3 hours. It depends on your on your kind of overall priorities. But the important thing is you need to time box your email time. You need to time box other people's priorities within your own to-do list.
Yeah.
And then if you ever get caught kind of quote-unquote doing email, ask yourself if clearing your inbox is the best use of your time right now. I guarantee you 95% of the time, the answer will be no. There's is a project that you need to move forward. Eventually, you do need to clear out your inbox, but following this process really helps to kind of prioritize it accordingly. All right, and finally, commitment number 3. When you are in your dedicated email time appointment, it's important to understand that not all emails are created equal. The problem is that every single email client, email device, webmail interface gives the same amount of real estate on the screen to every email. So for our brain, unconsciously, it's very hard to differentiate if it's an important email from your largest customer or an annoying newsletter. They all look the same, right? And it's certainly, after looking at it for a second or two, you can identify it, but those brain cycles are very, very expensive cognitively for us. And so kind of bulking, thinking about email, and again, any inbox, in this framework is really, really important. So there is unimportant stuff, important and urgent stuff, and then important, not urgent stuff. So unimportant, deal with it immediately. So just delete or archive in bulk. And so in bulk here is the keyword. So normally, normal people, when you go through your inbox, you kind of have to identify what's not important. In a sea of, there's a sea of important and unimportant stuff mixed together. That makes it very hard for our brain to process. So our brain, and again, there's a lot of science on this. Our brains are very good at pattern recognition. So if you have a pattern of, here's a list of unimportant stuff, it's very easy for us to pick out that one important thing out of that sea. If it's important and unimportant stuff mixed together, there's no pattern, and it's very expensive for our brain to figure this out. So this is what Sanebox does, and I'll show you in a minute, but really what we do is group those unimportant emails in one folder, so you can quickly go through them, and if something is in the wrong place, you just move it to the inbox or vice versa, and that immediately trains the system. But it's just important to do this in bulk, and I'll show you how I deal with this in my inbox. Important and urgent, this is the stuff you need to deal with right now. So these are the fires. The world's going to end if you don't respond. And then important, not urgent, this is actually, this stuff takes a lot of cognitive focus and a lot of time as well. So it's important to know when you should focus on this. And we'll talk about it in a second. So now digging into actually how this process works. So inbox 0 is another way of saying triage, and triage is an old method for processing. That's a terrible way of putting it. It's a way of dealing with wounded soldiers on the battlefield. So it was developed by Napoleon's chief surgeon during the Napoleonic Wars, and essentially there are 3 kinds of patients that come in. And by the way, this method, as you probably know, is used in hospitals to this day. So there are 3 kind of groups of patients: those that will die regardless of what you do, those that will live regardless of what you do, and then those that need work. So these are the people that, for whom a serious intervention will make a dramatic difference to the outcome. And so what they did on the battlefield is they moved the soldiers that would die. Regardless of what you do, they would give them morphine and put them in a separate tent so they could die in peace. Those that just need a quick fix, they quickly stitch them up and set them on their way. And what that allows is it allows the doctors to spend the bulk of their time actually dealing with the patients who really need their help and who they can't help. So how does this relate to our to inbox 0 and email? So there is the emails that should die are that delete or archive bucket, the unimportant emails. And actually, we'll talk about how we use it on the next slide. But essentially, these are the emails you should delete or archive, whatever you prefer, with one click. The quick fix is emails that take less than 2 minutes to deal with. And the things you can do, the only real 3 options of dealing with an email is defer it, delegate it, or respond. So defer means basically snoozing. So move it out of your inbox until you're ready or until it's actionable. Delegate, which just means forward to someone in your team or somebody else and just get it out of the way. And then, again, if a response takes less than 2 minutes, just deal with it now. Don't put it off. And if you do these steps, these steps 1 to 4, the only emails left in your inbox will be the ones that need work. So these are this is the do bucket. So do actual work. So how does Sanebox help you with all of this? And again, we really built our tool with this framework in mind. And so we have, as I mentioned, a dozen or so features, and we're not going to talk about all of them. We have basically anything that's kind of possible with email, we do. But we'll focus on the inbox zero workflow. And so let's start with the delete and archive bucket. So we have a couple of features to help you deal with this. The first one is this folder called Sane Later. So this is the unimportant folder where emails get moved into. So what happens when you first sign up, and by the way, to sign up, just go to sanebox.com and enter your email and get started. And so what we'll do is we'll analyze how you deal with your inbox. What emails do you open? What emails do you respond to? How quickly you open them? How quickly you respond? How often? How far back? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, we do all of this without ever looking at the body of the emails. We only look at the email headers. So basically the data that comes in with every email. So all of your content is private. And by the way, we don't look at it. It's our algorithms that look at it. So there's no human that sits there and moves emails around. So what we do is we move all of the unimportant stuff into this separate folder called Sane Later. So what I do is I go through this folder definitely in the morning, once a day, sometimes more than once a day, sometimes less than once a day. And it's up to me. And the idea here is this is kind of artificial plus human intelligence. We don't claim to be 100% accurate, and we very much encourage everybody to go through your inbox and double check to make sure we got everything right. But again, because our brain is so good at this, at pattern recognition, we can quickly see everything. We can kind of quickly scan through the subjects and the sender, and I can see, hey, this is an email from Thomas, and the subject says, hey, email that should be in your inbox. So I'm just going to move it to my inbox, and that immediately trains us to keep these emails in your inbox, not move them out, and vice versa. So if there's a unimportant email somewhere here, you can move it into the Sane Later folder, and again, that immediately trains us for the future. If you really never want to hear from a sender again, before I forget. So then what you do is you select all and hit delete. So after you kind of process to make sure there's nothing important, you can delete all of those emails with one click. And it seems like you're still reviewing everything. So it's not like we delete it. It's not we hide anything from you. We just make it easy for you to process. Now, if you never want to hear from a sender again, drag it into the same black hole folder. And actually, this sounds more annoying. So if you drag an email into same black hole, all future emails from that sender go straight to trash. So it's like unsubscribing, but easier and safer and faster. So you'll never hear from this person, but it's just kind of one drag away. Marking it as spam, by the way, won't do anything. So you actually have to do this. And by the way, you can enable, when you first sign up for Sanebox, you'll see Sane Later and another folder I'll talk about, Sane No Replies. And then you can enable the optional folders and features here on the Sanebox dashboard. So we'll talk about some of them. And also on the dashboard, you can customize kind of you basically can customize Sanebox to nth degree, but you can develop, you can create what we call custom filtering folders. So for instance, here we made a folder called Family and Friends, and it's a folder for, family and friends. And so the way you would work with it is you could, let's say, Randall is a family member, I would move it to the family folder, and future emails from Randall will go into my inbox. Oh, sorry, will go into that folder. So it's kind of, rather than creating rules and filters, which you can certainly do in Gmail, you can do this in Outlook, we just make it way, way easier. And by the way, I should also mention that this is a, we're showing this in Gmail, but really it's we work the same way in any email interface. All right, so we talked about deleting or archiving, so the unimportant bucket. If an email is important but not urgent, so let's say, well, this actually says important but not urgent project. Let's say it's a next week project. So I'm going to move it into the folder called Same Next Week. It's going to disappear out of my inbox and pop back into my inbox on Monday morning. You can also move it to the folder called Same Tomorrow, and it will reappear tomorrow morning. And you can customize pretty much any time frame you can think of. It's really important to snooze email. By the way, all the stuff you can do, if you decide not to use Sanebox, that's perfectly fine. You can do all of this stuff that we're talking about yourself. We make it easier, but it's not for everybody. So you can also create kind of a manual snooze folder. So drag an email, make a new folder called snooze, drag it there, and you just kind of make sure to periodically go through it and move those emails back into your inbox, or just deal with them right there.
And so those emails are for the important but not urgent bucket, is that right?
Exactly, yeah. So this is the, exactly. So this is the important, not urgent, and yeah, exactly. So, and also kind of ideally it's a quick fix. Bucket of that. So now let's talk about delegating and responding. And really, this is, I guess you should say, forward, reply, or send. It's kind of the same thing, so it's the sending of the email. So when you, let's say this is a, an email from an investor you probably should reply to, you can just hit reply, okay, again, or forward, that doesn't matter. The main kind of tool that we built for this is called Same No Replies. And really what it does is it's just a very, very easy way to see if somebody didn't get back to you. So let's say I want to reply to Clint, and I want to make sure he gets back to me by next Monday. I'm going to write monday@sanebox.com. And if he doesn't get back to me by Monday, I'm going to get a reply, I'm going to get a reminder to follow up. You can also do things like 4 days at sanebox.com. Or you can do, November 5th, 8 a.m. at sanebox.com. Any time frame you can think of works. And again, we'll monitor if you get a response or not, and remind you to follow up. And you can put this in CC or BCC. Usually BCC works better for people like investors because you don't want them to know that you're tracking them. If it's somebody on your team, if you're delegating, I actually find it useful to put this kind of time frame in CC, because it sets expectation of when this should get done. So, really useful. This is probably our most popular optional feature, and actually for us it's become just invaluable. So if you do all of these 4 of these things, then the only emails left, again, will be the ones that require work. And there's many different ways you could deal with this. And one of them is to move emails, to create Asana projects or Asana tasks out of those emails, and you can do that very easily with Asana. You can keep them in the inbox, or you can do whatever you want, but the important thing is that this is the stuff that you will deal with today. And if you don't finish those emails by end of day, my kind of personal favorite hack is I take all of them and drag them into the Same Tomorrow folder, and I magically finish my day with inbox 0, but I know that tomorrow morning they'll reappear. And it seems like cheating, and it is, but it's actually really good for your psyche to feel that accomplishment.
Great.
So that's the kind of that's Sanebox in a very small nutshell. We do a lot more. We can move attachments to cloud storage and customize it whichever way you think, but we're not going to talk about that. Instead, we're going to talk about advanced email hacks. So these are kind of short, actionable tips that we've come up with over the years. And really, by the way, I should have started this webinar by kind of qualifying what makes us the experts on this stuff. And really, what it is we've helped a lot of people over the years. And what we've tried to do, we noticed kind of early on that just having the right tools is not enough. The process in the system is really, really important. And so what we've tried doing over the years is talk to some of our customers who are really, really good at email. And it happens that a lot of them are very kind of public, very busy individuals. So it's the CEOs and venture capitalists and public people who get like thousands of legitimate, not spam, like legitimate emails a day. And what was really interesting is those people get through them, they get to inbox zero pretty much every day. And not only that, they respond to every email, which is just crazy. And so what we try to figure out is how do they do this? And so these, the email commandments and the kind of our take on inbox zero and triage is all came out of kind of that, learning from those people over the years. And so these hacks are some of the things that we've developed as well. And these are kind of short, actionable things you can do today. So don't get hacked. I mean, this is kind of self-explanatory, but nowadays, it's really, really important to have a unique and very hard to guess password for each of your different services. Meaning, don't share the same password across the services, because if you had the same password for your Yahoo Mail as you do for your bank account, well, guess what? Now your bank account password is compromised as well. So we here at Sanebox use 1Password. There's also LastPass, and there's a couple of other options. And these services create a unique, like really long, random, unique password for every website that you go to, and store it locally safely, and also sync it through Dropbox so you can use it on different devices. And then what that leaves you with is having to create a long and hard to guess password for your 1Password. I also have I have a unique password for my email that I remember because I want to easily access it from anywhere because email is so important. And so the hack that we recommend, that's the hack for creating a really easy, by the way, I shouldn't use the word hack on a slide that says don't get hacked. It's, yeah. The trick you can use to create that password is think of a sentence. It can be a song. It could be just a phrase that you know by heart. And essentially, as you're saying that sentence, type the first letter of every word. So this concoction of letters you see is Billie Jean is not my lover. She's just a girl who comes the one. So as you were typing this, put BJIN blah blah blah. Extra credit goes for using numbers. So like I am the one becomes the number 1. You can also capitalize differently to kind of make it more complicated. But again, you never have to remember this password. It's always in your mind. And as you can see, it's like really, really hard to guess for people. This is a big one. If you're like me and you have fast fingers, what I've done more than once is send an email and then have a oops moment and regret that immediately. So Gmail has a really good solution for that called undo send. You can turn it on right in your Gmail settings. But if you're not on Gmail or want to be even safer, just don't fill out the recipient's address until you've proofread the email. And in fact, here we go a step further. So email, kind of every single email compose window kind of forces you to think about it in, first we start with the to, then you put the subject, then you add the message, and then you add the attachment. So you go from top to bottom. And really the process should be reversed. First, add the attachment, because it's easy to forget. Type the message. And then when you type the message, you actually know what the subject should be. A lot of times, until you're done with the message, it's not really clear what the subject is. So it's always better to summarize after you're done with the content. And then once you're done with that, you've proofread everything, then you add the sender. And then you hit send. This is just a much more foolproof way to compose emails. The number one productivity faux that we see, even with our customers, but a lot of people, is using your inbox as an archive. Meaning you deal with the emails in your inbox and you just kind of leave them hanging there. This is really bad for your productivity. Basically, this is the equivalent of opening up your physical snail mail box, reading the mail and then stuffing it back into your inbox. It sounds a lot more ridiculous with physical mail, but really it's the same thing for your email or any inbox. Inbox is a place for content you haven't processed yet. Right? So once you process it, it should not be in your inbox. It should go somewhere else. It can be smoothed into the tomorrow folder. It can be, moved into archive or whatever makes, whatever you prefer to do with it. But if you have a large inbox today, do yourself a favor. Just create a new folder called Archive. Move all of those emails from your inbox into this folder called Archive. They're not going to go away anywhere. They're not going to disappear. But now you have inbox 0, and it'll be much, much easier for you to keep it there. So try this, and you'll thank me later. Using the subject wisely. So nowadays a lot of emails don't even get opened, so the subject might be the only thing that people see. And so make it actionable. Put instead of things, put 5 things I need you to do tomorrow. Putting tags into the subject is a next level stuff, and it's really powerful. So if something is time sensitive, just say that, urgent or time sensitive. If there's an action item there, put that. If one of my favorites is when I get an email with an NNTR in it, which means no need to respond, or NRN means no response needed. That just means that I can open this email and I know that there's nothing actionable in it for me. I can just do it safely, and I know I'll be able to delete it, and there's no new work for me. If the email is really short and you can fit the whole thing in the subject, kind of like a tweet or SMS, just put the message in the subject and put EOM at the end. That means end of message, and it just lets the recipient know that you don't need to click on it. If something is not urgent, put that as well. Put not urgent. And that just also relieves a lot of the stress from it. Don't unsubscribe from suspicious emails. We've kind of covered this a little bit earlier with our same black hole feature, but the problem when you unsubscribe from an email is that you essentially expose yourself as a human, A, and B, as a human who cares about their inbox. So you become a spammy marketer's dream come true, right? And we see this over and over. We hear these horror stories from people who go on an unsubscribe binge and then just end up with more mailing, with more emails than they started with. And so Same Black Hole solves this problem because it just you don't expose yourself as somebody, and you just never hear from them again. And that's really it from us.
Great. So that's the keys to managing your email, with so many actionable tips that we can all take away from that. But as Dimitri mentioned at the beginning, your email inbox can be very hard to distinguish what clear action items and who's responsible for what, which makes Asana an ideal solution for internal communications. And as Dimitri mentioned, a lot of companies designate explicitly that internal communication should live in a system like Asana, while external emails will still live in email. And so what I'm going to talk about today in Asana is how you can build out strategies to help you manage the internal communications across your team. But to do that, I'm going to hop over into Asana, where we have the agenda of things we're going to cover for internal communications. And the first thing is determining which work is going to be tracked in Asana and setting forth those expectations with your team. So as you're all striving for the team flow that Dimitri kind of outlined, all the benefits of that and what can help to contribute to that, getting team buy-in and setting forth the practice that your entire team is going to track certain communications in Asana and then holding the team responsible to that can really help to make the transition for your team from email into Asana. A lot of teams start communicating internally in email, and again, it can be very hard to distinguish what's external, what's internal, what's urgent, what's important, what the clear action items are. So there's a lot of reasons to move your team into Asana, but first it's important to decide as a team that you're going to do that, and then to keep everyone accountable for doing that. And so the first thing is deciding what types of communications you're going to put into Asana and setting clear expectations with the team. So if you want to reduce internal emails, it's creating a structure that can allow your team to communicate the way that they were communicating in email now in Asana. So that would include building out teams, building out projects, inviting the appropriate people, and also training your team about where they can put what types of communication, and I'll go over all of those now. So in Asana, you can communicate at many different levels. You can communicate from the highest level at a team conversation. We also have project conversations for conversations specific to projects, and then you can also comment on the task level. So I'm going to go over each of these examples today because whereas in email, everything comes in as a separate email, in Asana, you have different layers, and putting things in the right place will help your team to find the information that they need when they need it, and also to make sure that everybody's getting the appropriate notifications based on who needs to be involved. So at the highest level, a team conversation you can find over here in the sidebar just by opening up one of your teams and going to the team conversations area. And we recommend using team conversations for team-wide announcements, to celebrate major accomplishments, or to talk about multiple projects at a time. So something that's great in a team conversation is keeping cross-functional teams updated on work that's happening. So say, for example, that we've been working on this launch project on the support side, and we want to update the marketing team that this is coming out. So to do that, I can just start a new conversation in my team conversations area and say something like chat support is going live. And then similar to what you might put in the body of an email going out to a distribution list today, you would put that same type of information here in the body of my email, and I can make this more powerful by mentioning or linking out to the projects that I'm working on. So I can start with an @ symbol and then type the name of a specific project that I'm referencing. So in this case, it's a Climber chat support project. So I started with an @ sign, and then I'm going to create a link out to that. So I'm letting my marketing team know that this is happening by putting it in a team conversation, and then I'm linking out to that project if someone needs additional details. And then I can go ahead and post that. When you post in a team conversation, anyone who's a member of the team, anyone that you see up here, are going to be the folks that will be notified about that type of conversation in the system. And so again, that's great for team-wide announcements. Now, if you need to have a conversation about a specific project that's happening, say, for example, I wanted to brainstorm names of what we're going to name this chat support channel, I can have that conversation at the project level. And to do that, I would just go into the project. I'm in my project now, and I would go to the Conversations tab here. And project conversations are good for discussions that are happening around a specific group of work or a specific project. So you can see here we have an example of maybe we want to brainstorm for a meeting coming up, or if we wanted to solicit name ideas for this new chat support channel. Those are things we can put in a project conversation, and that's very similar to our team conversation in what we would put in the description there. The other type of communication that you have at the project level is your project status updates. So that's distinct from your conversations in that it's on a separate tab, the progress tab here. But this is where if you want to communicate to your team about updates that are happening to a project, you can put those in our update status box here, which will just distinguish for the team that this is an update about the progress we're making on this project. So maybe I want to say we are progressing towards the launch, and all is on track. And then I can put a status of green just to let everybody know that we are trending well on this project. And that's distinct from a conversation in that it's a very specific type of communication about how the project is tracking. The final level of communication in Asana is on specific tasks. So whereas team conversations are for team-wide announcements and project conversations are to discuss things relevant to a specific project, if you need to have conversations about a particular action item or work that's being done, task comments are a great place to do that. So this would be very similar to replying to an email thread. You're just commenting on an existing task or existing discussion that's happening in the system. So say, for example, that I'm in this chat support project, I'm working on one of our upcoming milestones, and I noticed that Shannon has completed this task, and we had a bit of conversation going here. I can jump into this conversation by just coming into my comment box on my task here and asking for the latest update. So I can say, where did we settle on this? And that way I can participate in this conversation and get any of the context that I need. Another great way to use those task comments is to update the team on the items that you're responsible for. So if, say, for example, I'm responsible for one of the milestones in that project, I have this in my task list, I've been working on this and it's due on Friday, but I want to update everybody on how it's going. I can use task comments for that as well. So I can say, we are at risk to miss the deadline, but I'm prioritizing this week. So that way I'm communicating with my team about where we are with this milestone. Now, when I comment on this specific task, anybody that's a follower on this task down here at the bottom is going to get that update. So this is where, similar to everyone being CC'd on an email thread, I can loop in additional folks as followers if I want them to be included in this discussion. And that's how I can comment on tasks. So those are the three main levels of communication in Asana, is at the team level, the project level, or the task level. And because Asana is structured and allows you to find all that information when you need it, you want to make sure to put the conversations that you're having in Asana at the right level, depending on what type of communication it is. But if you're moving from email into Asana as your internal communication channel, you can follow a lot of the same conventions that you have from email. So you can use followers like you would CC, you can use the comment field or the conversation text field to provide the body of what you might put in an email today, and you always have the name of the task or the name of the conversation that would be similar to your subject line in email. When you're creating these different levels of communication, it's important to be mindful of your followers and members. So I mentioned on my task that I just commented on that the followers down here at the bottom will get updates about that. So it's important, similar to how you might consider who's CC'd or BCC'd on an email, that you're also adding in followers for the folks who need to stay updated. Now, the difference between email and Asana is that you don't need to be CC'd or following in order to be able to find that information later. So sometimes you don't want to be getting all those email threads that are coming through that you're copied on, but you also don't want to miss out on that conversation, so you just kind of deal with them coming through your email inbox. In Asana, you can unfollow a task, but you can still go back and reference that later. So that's just a way to reduce the noise of the notifications coming in, but you can always, because Asana is a structured system and you have access to the information that you need, you can always go back and find that information later. And then additionally, your project members up here at the top, these folks are the ones who are going to get notified about new tasks created in that project and new conversations added to that project. So before I went and created a new conversation in my Climber chat support project, I would want to make sure that I have the right members in my project before, so that I can make sure that they're going to get notified. And all your conversations will let you know here who's going to be notified about that new discussion. So in my marketing team, that's going to be all of my marketing folks, and I can see the number and the list of people here who will be notified of that conversation. So it's always important to be mindful of followers, both to add followers and also to remove followers. And you can also remove yourself from the conversation at any time if it's becoming too noisy. As I did with the project in my team conversation, you can use @mentions, which just means that you're starting with an @ sign and then typing the name of a person, a project, or a task. And these can be helpful to link related information and also to loop in particular folks on a conversation. So if, say, for example, I was working on that milestone that was in my task list and I'm responsible for, if I wanted to loop in, say, Shannon, who's my manager on this, I can easily mention her in a comment, which I can say, Shannon, can you take a look at this and offer recommendations? So you'll notice she's not a follower yet, but as soon as I go ahead and comment by mentioning her, it will add her as a follower, and it also directs everybody when they see this conversation thread come across, they'll know that I'm directing this particular question to Shannon because I've mentioned her in this comment. So that's a really good way, at mentioning folks is a really good way to direct a particular thread of a conversation to one person, while also making sure that they're looped in for additional updates. And so at mentioning can be a great way to provide clarity, either whether you're providing clarity about particular tasks or projects that are related or for particular people. As we mentioned, Asana can help with internal communications because you can clearly designate who's responsible for what and when it's going to be done by, which you don't have fields for that in email. But it's important to always use those fields. So for actionable items, like if I head into my chat support project, every one of these actionable items should be assigned to somebody so that we all know who's responsible for that individual action item. And then additionally, you should always have a due date of when those tasks are going to be done by. And that just sets expectations across the team, so we all know when we can expect each action item to be done by. But you also want to be reasonable about the due dates. So this is a lot of work to be done, so I've already noted that it's at risk, and I can adjust that, but you should always be adjusting and commenting to let people know that the due date has changed so everybody's on the same page of when that'll be completed by. And then additionally, you can always create reference projects to save key communications. So I mentioned before that you don't need to be following a task to be able to find it. It's great to create reference projects for your team so people can go back and get information about either conversations they were not a part of or conversations that happened before they got involved in a particular project. So here internally we have conversations for things like contact information across the team, for brand styles and assets, a company library. You can share interesting articles in a project for people who want to share some thought leadership. And additionally, tracking things like meeting notes can be really effective in tasks. So if, say, for example, we have a meeting agenda project for our marketing team, we can go ahead and capture the notes for that project in a task here, and we can just capture all of the notes here in our field. So that way, if somebody didn't participate in the meeting or somebody else on another team wants to check in on what's going on, they can just come to our reference task here and get all the information that they need. So there's no need to forward this to anybody. There's no need to copy additional folks on a conversation. Everybody can find that information once it's captured here in Asana in a public project. So reference projects can be key. And the last one is to define the follow-up period. Now, we talked earlier about really defining the conventions of what types of communications will be tracked in Asana, and we recommend trying to move all internal communications into Asana that are project-related. But it's important also to define how quickly you expect folks to follow up on Asana tasks and comments. So internally, we usually recognize about a 24-hour period for somebody to get back to you on a comment that you place for them, but this is going to be different for every team. And this is, again, where those important but not urgent types of things come in. They are important, but if they're not urgent, we don't expect folks to follow up within a few minutes. We understand that some people are in Asana often and others are only in there once or twice a day, so it's important to define and communicate these across the team. And that's where instant communication really comes in. And this is the last kind of pillar of the trifecta that we've been talking about. But instant messengers like Slack or other instant chat apps can be really effective for things where you need a very quick follow-up period. So those types of tools have really good conventions built in for push notifications to make sure that folks are seeing things as they come up, which makes them an ideal tool for follow-ups when you need a really quick turnaround. So Dimitri mentioned they use Slack at their organization, and we use Slack also internally for those really quick communications that have to happen instantaneously. However, if you're developing a kind of chat convention with your team, it's important to, again, set those expectations and define what will be communicated in that instant platform, and then when it's appropriate to move something either into email or into a system like Asana. Additionally, it's important to make sure that you're organizing the channels and groups so that people know which channel to go to for which type of communication. And then there's also several other hacks that you can use. So Dimitri, do you want to expand on how you use the remind or Giphy commands at Sanebox?
Yeah, actually, Thomas wanted to cover that.
Hey everyone, so I'm Thomas here. I handle operations and biz dev here at Sanebox. So I'll kind of just go over some like our favorite tips and tricks that we found effective using primarily Slack. So one of the cool. So one of the biggest things is daily stand-up call. So for a team that's always remote, we have a daily check-in. Before we used Skype, Google Hangouts, Google Conference, and it was always kind of spotty. But Slack's been really good. So we have like a business channel, and we basically just call everyone at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time every day, and we do a quick roundup, and that gives a good pulse on the whole team to see like how everyone's doing, and it gets that real community culture thing going. The other thing too is the remind feature. So /remind, that command is great because it kind of notifies us, like for example, if we have like a metrics meeting the following day or something like that, we pre-put things in there, so that way when it's like 2 p.m. it kind of reminds everyone automatically, said, hey, meeting time, and check out this link. So it's very straightforward. Giphy is always fun. So when you go /Giphy, that thing always provides like a lot of comic relief / kind of like, almost like water cooler like banter a little bit. So again, it kind of humanizes and kind of like breaks up the routine. Sometimes everyone gets really zoned in with work, and it's a great break from things. The other thing is voting with emojis. So a lot of times, especially for example, when we're working with our UX developers and designers, they'll post something and we'll say, hey, give us feedback, and instead of pinging everyone, we'll just have them vote when they have time, so it doesn't, it's not as intrusive, and it doesn't take away from people's focus too much. So it's a great way to kind of like pick and choose, especially too sometimes, for example, we'll do like, what do you guys want for lunch? And then we'll like vote really quickly. So that way it's a very easy way to do things and to keep things in Slack.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing too is like to not go overboard with the channels. I think everyone, when they first install Slack, they want to do everything. They Google like what's best practices, what should I be doing, what bots should I be using,
Right.
And then immediately your whole thing kind of floods up and it becomes like counterproductive.
Right.
So basically, yeah, exactly. You always want to test and always just eventually just figure out and what really works for you and what really doesn't. And I remember in the beginning we had way too many channels. Everyone thought this was a great idea, and then 2 weeks down the line, maybe 20% of the channels get action. So again, there's a trial and error, but that's something just to be cognizant of. And the other thing too is using mentions appropriately. So in the beginning, we use @channel versus @here. So @channel basically notifies everyone, and that should only be really used for like urgent things. It could either be @here or you could just type it in. Again, like it's just being kind of respectful of everyone's time, kind of like how we talked about, and Katie was talking about how when you assign tasks for follow-up in Asana to kind of be respectful of when the due dates are, it kind of goes with the same, I guess, best practices. It kind of translates over. And then the last thing is, especially if you're busy or you're kind of in the zone and you have like a deadline to meet or you're really doing something, you can just really just pause the notifications. You snooze for 2 hours, 4 hours. It kind of works wonders. And if it really gets that bad, you can always just log out of Slack.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of difficult because I think they structured it so you always see like the number, the unread icon on it. So you kind of, your eyes naturally look at that, and there's been like studies around that as well. But that's kind of like one way we found to kind of work around that.
Fantastic. So thanks so much, Thomas. Those are all fantastic tips, and we recommend kind of defining those different tips that'll work well for your team depending on what type of instant communication channel you're using. So we're right up against our time, but we have one really great question from Paul, and that is about how you, Dimitri or Thomas at Sanebox, defined which channels were going to be used for what and then communicated that and enforced it with the team.
Yeah, I think I can take that. Essentially, we have very few. So we have a channel for for different groups that are essentially project-based channels, and the way to communicate them is pretty straightforward. You just invite people to them, and kind of in that invitation message, we just highlight, hey, this is what this channel is for. Please don't use it for anything else.
Right. But what about was it natural to decide when you were going to use email, when you were going to use Asana, and when you were going to use Slack? or is that?
Sorry, sorry. I thought you meant specifically Slack channels. Yeah. So we actually we communicated this at the team meeting, and we kind of laid out very explicitly, hey, if it's something that needs to be responded to within the next hour, it's Slack. If it's something that needs to be responded to within a day, it's email. And if it's actual real work, it's Asana. And in fact, we actually have a rule: unless it's in Asana, it's probably not going to get done. So that's really the hard and fast rules.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in really quick. I think the biggest difference is between like collaboration and communication. So Slack is more of like a communication tool. So if you want clarity really quick, sometimes it doesn't make sense to create a whole like thread in Asana. But if you want collaborative efforts, working with teammates, you want to like move projects forward, and you kind of want a hub to kind of organize all that stuff, you definitely want to have Asana. And then obviously for where email comes into play is kind of like where it's for client facing or you're talking to customers, more of an outbound. You don't sometimes like people still get into like the bad habit where like let's say a customer will send us something and then like we'll forward that email internally, and then we just start talking about chain and so like so habits like that do happen, but it's kind of critical to build the right habits from the beginning, kind of like how we outlined this webinar presentation for you. To kind of really, translate that process over, because it's all about habits and process at the end of the day.
Certainly, yeah. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, and I think that pretty much well summarizes up what we've been talking about today. Thanks so much, Thomas and Dimitri. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us today and for the great questions. And finally, thank you Dimitri and Thomas so much for providing more tips on how to use email and how to use those effectively with Asana and instant communication.
Thanks for having us.
Sure, thank you.
Our pleasure. Thanks everyone.